Miss Serena, let's not waste this court's time with unnecessary details. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching us from, and please like this video to support the channel. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy. Judge Samuel Harrington's voice cut through the courtroom, sharp and dismissive, carrying the weight of a man used to controlling the courtroom. Across from him, Serena Lawson stood firm at the prosecution table. Her case files were neatly stacked, her preparation flawless. She had expected this. Serena's voice remained steady as she responded, unfazed. Your Honor, the evidence we are presenting today will prove beyond doubt that— Enough. Harrington raised a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. He leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping lightly against the bench. He had silenced plenty of attorneys before he thought she would be no different. But Serena didn't flinch. She let the moment stretch, let the judge believe he was in control. Then she met his gaze, calm and unwavering. I assure you, Your Honor, what I have to say is very necessary, though I understand why you'd prefer not to hear it. The smirk on Harrington's face flickered. The audience shifted. Something was different this time. And deep down, the judge felt it too. The tension in the courtroom thickened like a brewing storm. The jury sat still, their eyes flicking between Serena Lawson and Judge Samuel Harrington, sensing a battle unfolding before them. Serena adjusted a document on the table, her expression composed as she continued, As I was saying, Your Honor, the financial records clearly show. Irrelevant, Judge Harrington snapped, waving a dismissive hand. Move on. A few chuckles echoed from the defense table. The businessman on trial, Robert Langford, smirked, sitting back in his chair. He had paid good money for this judge's favor. He wasn't worried. Serena didn't even blink. She had expected this. She reached for another file, keeping her voice calm. These documents trace a series of transactions money funneled through Shell company directly linking the defendant to fraudulent activities. Harrington scoffed loudly. Miss Serena, you're grasping at straws. This is nothing but speculation. Serena raised an eyebrow. With all due respect, Your Honor, these are government-verified records, signed by financial analysts. Hardly speculation. A murmur spread through the courtroom. The jury exchanged glances. Even the court stenographer hesitated for a brief second before resuming typing. Judge Harrington shifted slightly in his seat. His fingers tapped against the bench, a little too quickly. Harrington exhaled sharply, his patience thinning. Miss Serena, if you spent more time building a real case and less time grandstanding, perhaps this courtroom wouldn't have to endure your dramatic theories. Laughter rippled through the defense table again. Serena held back a smile. He was trying to rattle her to make her lose control, but she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She took a slow, measured breath and met his gaze. Your Honor, I'm simply laying out the facts, unless there's a reason you don't want them discussed. The air shifted. The smirk on Harrington's face didn't fully return this time. He cleared his throat. Watch yourself, Miss Serena. But the damage was done. The jury noticed his reaction. The spectators whispered among themselves. Reporters' pens moved even faster. Serena could feel it. The balance of power in the courtroom was starting to shift. Harrington pressed his lips together and turned to the defense. Mr. Ellis, do you have a response to this so-called evidence? The defense attorney, Mark Ellis, looked caught off guard. He straightened his tie. Your Honor, this entire argument is based on assumptions. There's no direct proof that. Serena cut in smoothly. Actually, there is. She pulled out another document and walked towards the jury, holding it up. This is a signed testimony from a former financial analyst at Langford Industries, confirming that these transactions were part of an elaborate fraud scheme. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Judge Harrington's fingers tightened on his gavel. Enough, Miss Serena. You are dangerously close to overstepping in my courtroom. Serena didn't move. She simply tilted her head slightly, observing him. The quick, impatient tapping of his fingers. The slight stiffness in his posture. The way he had dismissed her without even glancing at the documents. He wasn't just irritated, he was nervous. Serena slowly returned to her table, filing her documents away. She had seen this behavior before. A judge who tried too hard to suppress evidence. A judge who lashed out when pressed for answers. A judge who just might have something to hide. She stole another glance at Harrington. His jaw was tight, his fingers still tapping. Yes, something was definitely off, and Serena intended to find out what. Serena sat at her desk, the dim glow of her office lamp casting long shadows over the stacks of case files in front of her. The courtroom encounter with Judge Harrington still echoed in her mind. The way he dismissed her evidence, the flicker of unease in his eyesit wasn't just arrogance, it was fear. She reached for a thick folder labeled Judge Samuel Harrington, Case History. For the next few hours, Serena combed through years of his rulings. Fraud cases, corporate lawsuits, white-collar crime trialsa patterns started to emerge. Case after case, wealthy businessmen walked free. A CEO accused of embezzling millions, charges dismissed. A hedge fund manager caught in insider trading, ruled insufficient evidence. A real estate mogul accused of bribing city officials, mysteriously acquitted. Serena's grip tightened around the pages. This wasn't just coincidence. This was control. Harrington wasn't just favoring these defendants. She was protecting them. She exhaled slowly, pulling out her phone. There was one person who might have more answers. She scrolled to a familiar name and hit call. Liam Carter speaking, came the voice on the other end. "Liam, it's Serena Lawson," she said. "We need to talk. Now." An hour later, Serena sat in a dimly lit diner across from Liam Carter, an investigative journalist known for exposing corruption in the justice system. Liam smirked as he stirred his coffee. "I was wondering when you'd come knocking." Serena didn't waste time. "You've been investigating Judge Harrington for years. I need everything you have." Liam leaned back, studying her. "He's slippery, but not invincible. What tipped you off?" Serena tapped her fingers against the file in front of her. "The way he tried to silence me in court, the way he dismissed clear evidence without even looking at it." Liam nodded. "That's what he does. He's careful. He doesn't just rule in favor of the rich, make sure cases against them never stand a chance." He reached into his bag and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it across the table. Serena opened it, her eyes scanning the documents inside. Bank statements, wire transfers, shell companies. "This," Liam said, tapping the papers, "is how he gets paid." Serena's heart pounded as she studied the numbers. Large deposits wired to offshore accounts, transferred just days before Harrington ruled in favor of major corporations and high-profile defendants. "Anonymous payments," Liam explained. "But when you trace the funds, they all lead back to companies tied to Harrington's past rulings." Serena's jaw tightened. This was proof, but not enough. "If I bring this to court, he'll dismiss it as circumstantial," she said, shaking her head. "I need someone on the inside, someone who can confirm these aren't just coincidences." Liam sighed. "Then you need a witness." Serena's mind immediately went to Daniel Reeves, the former court clerk, who had suddenly quit working under Harrington. She stood gathering the documents. "I think I know exactly who to talk to." The apartment building was old, its faded brick exterior and flickering hallway lights giving it a worn-out feel. Serena Lawson stood outside apartment 3B, her fist hovering over the door. She had spent hours tracking down Daniel Reeves, a former court clerk who had worked directly under Judge Samuel Harrington. Then, one day he vanished. He quit without notice. No reason given. No explanation. And now Serena needed to know why. Taking a breath, she knocked firmly. Silence. She knocked again, louder this time. Footsteps, the sound of a lock turning. Then the door cracked open just enough for a cautious pair of eyes to peek out. Daniel Reeves looked older than his age-worn, tired and on edge. "I'm not interested," he muttered, starting to close the door. Serena stuck her foot in the doorway. "I know why you left, Daniel," she said, her voice steady. "And I know you're scared." His grip on the door tightened. "You don't know anything. I know you worked for Harrington." She held up a file. "And I know you saw things you couldn't live with." Daniel's breath hitched. "You need to leave," he whispered. "It's not safe." Serena stepped closer. "Not safe for who, you or Judge Harrington?" Daniel rubbed a hand over his face, his shoulders tense. "You don't get it," he muttered, shaking his head. "That man, he's powerful. He can ruin people, destroy careers. You think I left for no reason?" "I think you left because you saw too much," Serena countered. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Saw too much? I was in the middle of it." Serena leaned in. "Then tell me what you saw." Silence stretched between them. Then Daniel turned away, running a hand through his hair. "Even if I did talk, what makes you think he won't come after me?" Serena's voice softened. "Because I'll make sure he doesn't. You'll be under federal protection the moment you testify, but we can't take him down without you." Daniel exhaled, his hands shaking slightly. "I don't know," he muttered. "I don't know if I can do this." Serena placed a reassuring hand on the table. "If you stay silent, he wins," she said. "You know that, don't you?" Daniel swallowed hard. He looked at Serena, searching her face, as if deciding whether to trust her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll talk." Daniel took a shaky breath. "I saw everything," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "The bribes, the case tampering, the intimidation." Serena pressed record on her phone, setting it between them. "Start from the beginning." Daniel nodded, rubbing his hands together as if trying to shake off the guilt. "It started with favors," he said. "A small case here, a ruling there. Then the money started flowing in, big payments, offshore accounts." Serena leaned in. "And you were told to cover it up?" Daniel gave a sad smile. "Not just cover it up. I was told to make it happen. Changing files, making evidence disappear, misfiling appeals, it was all part of the system." Serena gritted her teeth. She had suspected this, but hearing it confirmed made her stomach turn. "Did he ever threaten anyone?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. "A lawyer once challenged his ruling. The next day his house was broken into. Nothing was stolen, just a message left on his desk." Serena narrowed her eyes. "What message?" Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. "Stop asking questions." Serena's pulse pounded in her ears. This wasn't just corruption, this was criminal. She looked at Daniel. "You just became the most important witness in this case." Daniel swallowed. "Then I hope you're right about protecting me." Serena picked up her phone and stopped the recording. "Don't worry," she said. "By the time I'm done, Harrington will be the one looking over his shoulder." And with that, she had everything she needed to bring him down. Serena sat in the district attorney's office, surrounded by her trusted team. Stacks of financial records, wire transfer reports, and case files covered the table. The air was thick with urgency. "We're close," she said, scanning the documents. "We just need to connect the money directly to Harrington." Ethan Cole, a forensic accountant, leaned forward. "We already did." He slid a folder across the table. Serena flipped it open, and there it was. Multiple offshore accounts, registered under fake names. Each account received large deposits just days before Harrington ruled in favor of major corporations and wealthy defendants. Her pulse quickened. "How much money are we talking?" Ethan pointed to a highlighted figure. "Over $20 million. Serena exhaled. This was more than corruption. This was organized crime. Mia Torres, her legal assistant, scanned the pages. "If we can prove these accounts belong to Harrington, he's done." Serena's mind raced. This was enough to take him down, but only if she played it right. "If we present this too soon, he'll find a way to dismiss it," she said. "We need the right moment." She glanced at her team. "When we strike, it has to be checkmate." Judge Samuel Harrington slammed his gavel down hard, the sharp crack echoing through the tense courtroom. His usual smug expression was gone, replaced by something far less controlled. "Miss Serena, I will not allow you to turn this trial into a circus," he barked. Serena Lawson stood at the prosecution table, completely unfazed. "Your Honor, I'm simply presenting the facts," she replied smoothly, flipping through her documents. "Unless, of course, there's a reason you'd rather the jury not hear them." The room fell silent. The jury exchanged glances. Reporters scribbled furiously. Even the court stenographer hesitated for a moment before continuing to type. Harrington's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, gripping the bench. "Move on, Miss Serena. Now." Serena didn't argue. Instead, she simply nodded, knowing she had already won a small battle. Harrington was losing control. Over the next hour, Harrington's temper flared again and again. He interrupted Serena's questioning more than a dozen times, often without reason. He sustained objections from the defense without even hearing her argument. When one juror took notes, he shot them a warning glare. And then, in an unprecedented move, he threatened to hold Serena in contempt simply for pressing a key witness. The entire courtroom could feel it. The once powerful judge who had always ruled with cold precision was unraveling. Outside the courtroom, word had spread fast. Businessmen who had once been seen dining with Harrington were suddenly avoiding the press. A longtime political ally cancelled a scheduled meeting with him. Even the defense attorney Mark Ellis, who had been so sure of victory just days ago, looked increasingly uneasy. Serena noticed it all. Harrington was running out of people willing to protect him, and he knew it. As the day's proceedings wrapped up, Serena gathered her files, her mind already working on the next step. She had the offshore accounts. She had the whistleblower. Now, she just needed the right moment to strike. Harrington was making mistakes, big ones. Soon, he would make the biggest mistake of all. And when he did, Serena would be ready. The headlines spread like wildfire. Explosive allegations against Judge Harrington, offshore accounts linked to high-profile rulings. News anchors dissected the story. Social media buzzed with speculation. And outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, hoping to catch a glimpse of the judge, whose integrity was now in question. Serena watched it all unfold from her office, a quiet smirk forming. The leak had worked, and this was only the beginning. Inside his chambers, Judge Samuel Harrington paced, gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. With shaking hands, he dialed a familiar number. "You need to fix this," he growled the moment Senator Whitmore picked up. A sigh came from the other end. "Richard, the media's all over this. I can't just make it disappear." Harrington clenched his jaw. "You owe me. I've done favors for half of Washington." A long pause. Then Whitmore's voice dropped to a whisper. "No one wants to be caught defending you right now. You're toxic." The line went dead. Harrington stared at his phone, his breathing ragged. For the first time, he realized he was alone. Harrington tried other contacts. CEOs whose cases he had dismissed. Businessmen who had paid him under the table. None of them answered. His carefully built empire, the wealth, the power, the protection was crumbling. He slammed his fist on his desk. Damn her. Serena Lawson. She was behind this, and he had underestimated her. Meanwhile, Serena sat at her desk, reviewing the final piece of evidence. The whistleblower testimony. The offshore accounts. The secret wire transfers. She had everything. Judge Harrington was still trying to control the game. What he didn't know. Serena had already won. The courtroom was packed, buzzing with tension. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and the jury members sat up straighter. At the defense table, Judge Samuel Harrington sat rigid, his usual arrogance replaced by something much closer to unease. He had spent the last 24 hours trying to contain the damage. But now, all eyes were on Serena Lawson, and she was ready. Serena walked to the center of the courtroom, her voice steady. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce new evidence, financial records detailing offshore accounts tied to Judge Harrington. A collective gasp rippled through the room. She held up a file. These records show large deposits made into hidden accounts just days before key rulings. Every single transaction aligns with a dismissed case, favoring powerful defendants. The jury exchanged glances. Harrington leaned forward, forcing out a laugh. "This is ridiculous," he scoffed. "You expect the court to believe fabricated documents?" Serena didn't blink. These accounts were traced back to fake companies owned by people who benefited from your rulings. Harrington shifted in his seat. "This is a desperate attempt to smear my name," he snapped. But his voice wasn't as steady as before. Serena took a slow step closer. "If that's the case, Your Honor, then I suppose you can explain this." She reached into her bag and pressed play on a small recorder. A voice filled the courtroom. "Make sure Serena never sees those bank records." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers. Reporters scribbled furiously. The jury's eyes widened in shock. Judge Harrington froze. His face, usually so composed, had turned ghostly pale. Serena let the moment stretch. Let him feel the weight of his own words. Then she tilted her head slightly. "You were saying, Your Honor?" Harrington gripped the bench. His hands shook. For the first time, he knew he was trapped. For a brief moment, the courtroom was silent. The recording of Judge Harrington's voice, "Make sure Serena never sees those bank records," still echoed in everyone's mind. Then he snapped. "This is an outrage." Harrington's voice boomed through the courtroom as he slammed his gavel down. "I will not stand for these baseless accusations." But no one was listening. The jury wasn't fooled. The reporters in the gallery were scribbling furiously, their eyes gleaming with the story of the decade. Serena simply stood at the prosecution table, arms folded, watching. Harrington's face was red, his breathing uneven. He turned to the jury, gesturing wildly. "You think you can take me down?" he bellowed, pointing a finger at Serena. "You're just another overambitious prosecutor looking for headlines." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd, but not the kind Harrington was hoping for. The jury wasn't buying it. The audience, once watching him with respect, now saw him for what he was, a man cornered. Serena finally broke her silence. "Your Honor," she said, her voice smooth and unwavering, "I suggest you compose yourself." Harrington's jaw clenched. "You're making this case easier for me." A stunned hush fell over the courtroom. A reporter leaned forward, pen poised. A jury member raised an eyebrow, nodding slightly. Because Serena was right. Harrington was proving her case for her. Harrington's hands trembled on the bench. He glanced toward his defense attorney, but even Mark Ellis wouldn't meet his eyes. His allies had abandoned him. For the first time in his career, he had no control. Serena slowly gathered her papers. She had nothing left to prove. Because the truth had already spoken. Judge Samuel Harrington gripped his gavel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His heart pounded, but he refused to show weakness. "This case is over," he declared, his voice cracking slightly. "This so-called evidence is inadmissible. I am dismissing all charges against—" Boom! The heavy courtroom doors swung open. Gasps filled the air as 3 FBI agents strode in, their dark suits crisp, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. A lead agent stepped forward, holding up a document. His voice carried through every corner of the silent courtroom. "Judge Samuel Harrington, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, bribery, and conspiracy." The entire room froze. Reporters fumbled for their cameras. Jurors gaped, eyes wide. Even the defense attorney, Mark Ellis, slowly stepped away from Harrington. Serena stood still, watching. For months, she had imagined this moment. And now, it was finally happening. Harrington's lips parted, his face drained of color. You can't be serious." The FBI agent didn't flinch. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." A ripple of hushed whispers spread across the room. Serena noticed something. No one was stepping in to defend him. His allies? Gone. His power? Gone. For the first time, Harrington was alone. Harrington slammed his gavel down again, but this time, it was useless. "This is absurd," he bellowed. "I am the law." The lead agent didn't move. Not anymore. 2 U.S. Marshals stepped forward. "Stand up," one of them ordered. Harrington's chest rose and fell rapidly. He didn't move. Then they grabbed his arms. The courtroom collectively held its breath. A judge, a man who had once ruled this very room with unchecked power, was now being forcibly pulled to his feet. Clink. The sound of metal handcuffs locking around his wrists rang through the silent courtroom. For years, he had decided the fate of others. Now, his own fate had been sealed. Serena didn't smile. Justice wasn't about victory, it was about truth. And the truth had finally caught up to Judge Harrington. The cold steel bars slammed shut, sealing Judge Samuel Harrington inside a small, dimly lit cell. The once powerful man who had commanded a courtroom with a flick of his gavel now sat on a thin cot, staring blankly at the grey concrete walls. For the first time in decades, he had no control. The federal holding facility was eerily silent, except for the distant sound of a guard's footsteps echoing down the corridor. This wasn't his grand courtroom. There were no defense attorneys to smooth things over, no wealthy businessmen slipping him favors, no politicians shielding him from consequences. He was just another inmate waiting for his sentence. Harrington rubbed his hands together, his mind racing. This was temporary. It had to be. He stood abruptly and walked over to the phone mounted on the wall. With shaking hands, he dialed a number. Ring. Ring. Voicemail. He cursed under his breath and tried another number, a long-time political ally. Straight to voicemail. His grip on the phone tightened. He dialed again, a corporate executive whose fraud case he had dismissed years ago. No answer. One after another, the people he had protected for years were gone. Harrington clenched his jaw. How could they abandon him, after everything he had done for them? But then the realization crept in, they didn't need him anymore. He was no longer a judge, no longer useful. He was just a liability now. And liabilities were left behind. Harrington slumped against the cold wall, his mind replaying the events of the last few days. The way Serena Lawson had stood her ground in his courtroom, the way the jury had seen through his desperate lies, the moment the handcuffs had locked around his wrists. For years he had controlled the system, bending the law for the rich and powerful. Now the system had turned on him. There was no escaping this. His empire was collapsing. And for the first time in his life, Samuel Harrington had no way out. The federal courtroom was packed. Spectators filled every seat, reporters lined the back wall, and cameras flashed as the most highly anticipated trial of the year reached its final day. At the defense table, Samuel Harrington sat motionless. His once imposing presence had withered into something hollow. The perfectly tailored suits, the smug smirkle gone. Across from him, Serena Lawson stood tall. This was it. The moment justice would finally be served. The prosecutor approached the witness stand. "Miss Serena," the attorney began. "Based on your investigation, what role did Samuel Harrington play in the cases you presented?" Serena held up a thick folder of documents. Judge Harrington systematically manipulated court rulings in exchange for money. He altered legal outcomes, dismissed cases with overwhelming evidence, and protected wealthy criminals all while profiting through offshore accounts. She turned toward the jury, meeting their eyes. "We have the financial records, wire transfers, and sworn testimony from a former court clerk who witnessed the fraud firsthand. Every piece of evidence connects to one person, Judge Samuel Harrington." The defense attorney attempted to object, but the judge presiding over the case quickly overruled it. The case wrapped up faster than expected. The evidence was airtight. The jury had seen it all: bank records, bribes, threats. There was no room for doubt. After only 2 hours of deliberation, they returned to the courtroom. The courtroom fell silent as the jury foreman stood. He cleared his throat and read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Samuel Harrington, guilty on all counts." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Some gasped, others nodded. Serena exhaled slowly. Justice had spoken. Harrington stared straight ahead, his face pale. The presiding judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at him. "Samuel Harrington, you were entrusted with upholding the law, but instead you abused your position for personal gain. Your corruption has undermined the very foundation of this court." A heavy pause. "You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison." The gavel slammed down. It was over. 2 U.S. Marshals approached the table. Harrington didn't move. The lead officer leaned down. "Stand up." Slowly, with his hands shaking, Harrington rose to his feet. A marshal pulled out a pair of metal handcuffs. Click. The sound of Harrington's wrists being restrained was the only noise in the courtroom. For years he had judged others. Now, he was the one being led away. Serena watched as he was escorted past the spectators, past the jury, past the reporters who had once hung on to his rulings. But this time, no one looked at him with respect, because the man who had controlled the courtroom had finally been brought to justice. The courthouse steps were packed. Cameras flashed, reporters pushed forward, and the world waited for Serena Lawson's statement. Behind her, banners from major news networks displayed the headline, "Disgraced judge sentenced to 25 years, justice prevails." The energy in the crowd was electric. For months, the public had followed the case, watching as Serena took on one of the most corrupt figures in the justice system. Now, as she stepped up to the podium, silence fell. Serena took a deep breath, meeting the eyes of those before her. "This is not just my victory," Serena began, her voice steady and strong. "This is a victory for justice." She paused, letting the words sink in. For too long, those in power have believed they are untouchable, that the law bends to their will, that wealth and influence can shield them from consequences. But today, we proved otherwise. A wave of applause erupted. Some in the crowd even wiped away tears, former victims of Harrington's rulings, people who had once believed the system would never work for them. Serena continued, her tone unwavering. "Judge Harrington thought he could silence the truth. He thought his position made him invincible. But justice does not belong to the powerful, it belongs to the people. No one is above the law." The crowd cheered. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing the moment. As the applause died down, Serena's expression softened. "This case was never about personal victory," she said. "It was about doing what was right even when the odds were against me." She took a breath, then looked directly into the cameras. "If this case has proven anything, it's that corruption can be exposed, that truth can win, and that justice will always, always find its way." The crowd erupted into cheers once more. Later that evening, Serena sat in her office, exhausted but satisfied. The trial was over. Harrington was behind bars. Justice had been served. As she sorted through the flood of emails and messages, one envelope caught her eye. It was handwritten. Curious, she opened it and began to read. "Dear Miss Serena, I watched your case every day. I saw the way you stood your ground, the way you never backed down even when they tried to silence you. You made me believe in justice again. One day, I hope to stand where you stood and fight for what's right, just like you did. Thank you." A future law student. Serena sat back, exhaling slowly. She had taken down a corrupt judge. She had exposed the truth. But this, inspiring the next generation to fight for justice, was the real victory. She smiled. Justice wasn't about power. It was about doing what was right, no matter the odds. And with that, Serena looked ahead to her next battle, because justice never sleeps. Serena Lawson stood against corruption and proved that no one is above the law. If you love powerful courtroom dramas, shocking legal battles, and stories where justice wins, you're in the right place. Like this video if you believe in fighting for the truth. Comment below what was the most powerful moment of this case. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an explosive legal showdown. More gripping cases are coming soon, don't miss out.